Imran Saifullah was known as a devoted husband, Nadia Zuleikha was admired as a loving wife, and Sofiya Hamrah was respected as a grieving mother. Yet behind the walls of their home, a forbidden secret bound them together, and that secret would soon explode into betrayal, blood, and murder. Imran Saifullah carried himself like a man who had nothing to hide. To neighbors in Kuala Lumpur, he was the perfect image of a responsible husband. He worked long hours in a government office, prayed regularly at the mosque, and kept a reputation free from scandal. His wife, Nadia Zuleikha, trusted him completely. She often told her friends how blessed she was to have a man who cared for her, provided for her, and honored their marriage. Their life together appeared peaceful, with Nadia's quiet smile and Imran's calm discipline creating an image of harmony. When people looked at them, they saw a couple grounded in faith and stability. They did not know how fragile the illusion truly was. After the death of her father, Nadia's mother, Sofiya Hamrah began spending more time in their household. She was a woman whose presence drew attention. Even in her 50s, she carried herself with elegance, her sharp eyes observing everything around her. She was grieving, but she did not allow herself to appear weak. Nadia, the only daughter, insisted Sofiya stay close. In her mind, it was natural for her mother to be part of their home, to fill the emptiness that loss had created. What Nadia did not realize was how deeply Sofiya's presence would alter the rhythm of her marriage. At first, Imran treated Sofiya with the courtesy expected of a son-in-law. He offered rides to the market, carried her bags, and checked on her when she seemed lonely. He believed he was fulfilling a duty, nothing more. Yet over time, small moments became more frequent. Late at night, when Nadia fell asleep early, Sofiya and Imran would remain in the living room, sharing tea. They spoke about grief, about loneliness, about the weight of responsibility. Sofiya's words carried comfort, but they also carried something else, something unspoken that lingered in the air between them. Imran began to notice details he had ignored before. The way Sofiya's laughter filled the silence, the way she held his gaze longer than necessary, the way she seemed to understand the frustrations he never voiced to his wife. He told himself these were harmless thoughts, nothing to dwell on. Still, he found himself waiting for those conversations, searching for excuses to stay up later than usual. Sofiya, too, seemed aware of the growing bond. She did not push at first, allowing the connection to deepen quietly, like a seed planted in soil. To Nadia, nothing seemed unusual. She loved her mother's presence in the house, grateful that Imran and Sofiya got along so well. She interpreted their closeness as a sign of respect and family unity. When she saw them sitting together with cups of tea, she smiled, believing her husband was kind enough to keep her mother company. The thought that something dangerous might be growing never crossed her mind. For Imran, the guilt was subtle at first. Each time he prayed, he tried to push the thoughts away, reminding himself of his vows and his faith. But temptation has a way of cloaking itself in innocence. What began as companionship slowly shifted into something heavier, something that left him restless at night. He would lie beside Nadia, her steady breathing beside him, while his mind drifted to Sofiya's laughter echoing in the living room. The house itself seemed to change. The walls that once held peace now carried hidden currents of tension. Imran avoided admitting it, but he knew his behavior was no longer that of a faithful husband. Sofiya never spoke openly of desire, but her silence was its own form of invitation. She lingered in the kitchen when he entered, brushed past him a second too long, allowed her eyes to rest on him when Nadia wasn't looking. These gestures were small, almost unnoticeable, yet they left imprints on his conscience. The perfect family illusion remained intact for outsiders. Neighbors saw nothing but a dutiful son-in-law, a devoted wife, and a mother healing from loss. But within the walls of that house, the balance was shifting. The bond between Imran and Sofiya was no longer innocent. It had crossed an invisible line, one that neither of them admitted but both of them recognized. And as the days passed, the weight of their secret began to press down, setting the stage for a darkness that would eventually destroy everything Nadia believed was safe. Imran's secret life unfolded slowly, like a shadow stretching across his home. What began as late-night conversations with Sofiya Hamrah turned into something that consumed his every thought. He would sit at work, papers stacked on his desk, yet his mind drifted back to her. The scent of her perfume, the way she leaned closer when speaking, the softness of her voice, they all lingered with him. It was no longer simply a bond of comfort. It had transformed into a forbidden attachment that he could not easily escape. Sofiya seemed to understand the power she held. She did not speak openly of love or longing, but her actions revealed everything. She lingered near him when Nadia was out of the room, brushing his arm in ways that could be dismissed as accidental. She chose her clothing carefully when Imran was home, ensuring her presence never went unnoticed. The tension between them grew heavier with each passing day, and though neither said it aloud, the silence between them carried more weight than words could. Imran fought his conscience constantly. He prayed for strength, telling himself he would resist, that he would protect the sanctity of his marriage. Yet temptation gnawed at him. He felt trapped between two lives, the one the world expected him to uphold, and the one that whispered in the quiet shadows of his home. Each time he told himself to stop, Sofiya would draw him back with a glance, or a phrase that struck too deeply to ignore. Nadia, blind to the storm brewing under her roof, continued her routine. She trusted both her husband and her mother completely, never suspecting the unthinkable. She moved about the house with a peace that only deepened the guilt in Imran's chest. Sometimes he could not look her in the eyes, afraid that she might read the truth in his expression. Yet Nadia only smiled at him, grateful for the harmony she believed her family enjoyed. It was Sofiya who began to push the boundaries further. She was not satisfied with stolen glances and quiet moments. She wanted more time, more attention, more commitment. The thrill of secrecy excited her, but she also hungered for control. In her mind, she had already claimed Imran as her own. She began to demand his presence late at night, making excuses for them to be alone. She whispered to him about how unhappy she had been in her marriage, how he was the first man to truly understand her. These words trapped him further, filling him with a false sense of importance. Imran tried to resist her growing demands, but each refusal was met with manipulation. Sofiya reminded him of everything they had already shared, the secrets they now carried together. She played on his fears, suggesting that she could expose him to Nadia if he dared to walk away. The threat was subtle at first, hidden beneath her charm, but Imran could feel the sharpness in her words. She was tightening her hold on him, and he had no clear way out. Their recklessness began to draw attention. One evening, Farid Junaid, the neighbor, noticed something strange. He had gone outside for a smoke, and happened to glance at the window of the house. Through the curtains he caught sight of Imran entering Sofiya's room late at night. He did not think much of it at first, convincing himself it must have been innocent. Still, the image stayed in his memory, lingering quietly like an unanswered question. Inside the house, the tension grew unbearable. Imran lived in constant fear of discovery, torn between his loyalty to Nadia and the magnetic pull of Sofiya. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope, where one wrong step would bring everything crashing down. He began to lose sleep, haunted by the reality that his choices had set him on a dangerous path. He knew this was no longer simply an affair. It was a secret powerful enough to ruin him, and Sofiya's hunger for more ensured that the risk of exposure was only growing. The line between desire and destruction was thinning, and Imran was powerless to stop what was coming. Nadia Zuleikha had always trusted the foundation of her marriage. She noticed when Imran began to come home later than usual, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes distant, and his words short. At first, she believed the stress of work was weighing on him. She told herself that his silence was only exhaustion, that his restlessness was temporary. Yet over the weeks, a coldness spread between them, subtle but undeniable. Imran avoided her gaze, spoke less at the dinner table, and seemed distracted even when he sat beside her. Nadia's instincts stirred unease, though she refused to confront the thought that her marriage could be unraveling. Behind her back, the pressure inside Imran's mind was reaching unbearable levels. Sofiya Hamrah was no longer content with secrecy. The affair had filled her with a dangerous confidence, and she began planting ideas that unsettled Imran. She spoke of a future where they would not have to hide, where they could openly live as a couple. The obstacle in her mind was Nadia, the daughter she had once raised with tenderness. To Sofiya, Nadia had become nothing more than a barrier standing between her and what she desired. Imran resisted her words at first, horrified at the thought. Murder was unthinkable, a sin that weighed heavier than anything else. Yet Sofiya had mastered the art of manipulation. She reminded him of the risks he already carried, the scandal that would erupt if their secret came out. She warned him that Nadia would eventually discover the truth and destroy his reputation, his career and his image in the community. To Sofiya, the solution was simple: remove Nadia, and the future would be theirs. The thought lodged itself in Imran's mind like a splinter. He prayed harder, hoping for strength to resist, but each prayer left him with more fear than clarity. He was trapped between shame and desire, unable to escape the tightening grip of Sofiya's will. He began to see his wife not as a companion, but as a threat to the life he had chosen in secret. Each time he looked at her, guilt and resentment mixed together, poisoning the love that once defined their marriage. The breaking point came one humid evening in June. The air inside the house was thick, the ceiling fan spinning lazily as Nadia prepared dinner in the kitchen. Sofiya sat in the living room, her sharp eyes on Imran, signaling silently that the time had come. Imran's heartbeat thundered as he stood frozen between the two women, torn apart by loyalty and temptation. He tried to convince himself to delay, to wait for another time, but Sofiya's gaze pressed on him like a command. When Nadia set the plates on the table and called them to eat, the evening appeared ordinary to anyone outside. Yet inside those walls, a storm had been brewing for months, and now it erupted. The violence was sudden and merciless. Imran, trembling yet driven by Sofiya's manipulation, acted with a force that shocked even himself. The attack left Nadia collapsed on the living room floor, her life extinguished in moments. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by Sofiya's calm breathing, as though she had anticipated this all along. Imran stood over his wife's body, his hands shaking, his mind a whirl of disbelief. Guilt crashed through him, but Sofiya's presence steadied the moment. She reminded him that there was no turning back, that survival now depended on what they did. In that instant, the bond between them shifted again. They were no longer simply partners in a forbidden affair. They had crossed into something darker, bound together by a secret written in blood. The walls of the house that had once echoed with Nadia's laughter now absorbed the weight of silence. What had been a home was now a crime scene. The man who once embodied faith and respectability had destroyed everything he claimed to cherish. Yet as Sofiya reassured him with cold determination, Imran clung to the belief that they could cover the truth, not realizing that their crime had already begun to unravel in ways neither of them could control. The house that once carried the image of stability now reeked of fear and desperation. Imran and Sofiya worked frantically to erase the evidence of what had taken place. Nadia's lifeless body lay in the living room, as they whispered plans of how to disguise the crime. The decision came quickly. They would stage it as a burglary gone wrong. It seemed simple enough in their panic. Make the scene chaotic, break a window, scatter belongings, and hope the police accepted it. In their minds they believed confusion would protect. Imran smashed a window with a hammer, carefully scattering shards of glass outside to mimic the violence of a break-in. Sofiya overturned drawers, threw clothes on the floor, and removed jewelry from Nadia's room, tucking it into a small bag to make the theft look believable. They wiped surfaces, tried to remove fingerprints, and even dragged furniture slightly out of place. By the end, the room appeared like a ransacked home, but small inconsistencies were left behind, details they could not see in their rush, but details that trained eyes would later note. When the police arrived after a neighbor reported strange noises, Detective Arman Khalid was among them. He had seen many crime scenes in his career, but something about this one unsettled him. The broken glass, scattered across the lawn outside rather than inside the house, raised an immediate question. Why would a burglar smash a window from the inside out? The staging felt too deliberate, almost theatrical. He crouched near the shards, studying the angles, silently noting that something was not right. Inside the house, his suspicions deepened. The drawers were emptied, but the items scattered on the floor were not consistent with a hurried. Certain valuables remained untouched, while other items of little worth were missing. It looked less like a burglary, and more like an imitation of one. Nadia's body told a story too. The injuries were up close, personal and deliberate. This was not the kind of violence typical of a thief startled in the act. This was intimate, carried out by someone she knew. Neighbors were questioned that night, and though most claimed ignorance, one voice added weight to Khalid's suspicion. Farid Junaid, the man who lived next door, recalled something strange he had noticed weeks earlier. He hesitated at first, unsure if his memory was important, but he eventually admitted that he had seen Imran entering Sofia's room, late at night. The details startled the office. While it could have been innocent, paired with the crime, it suggested a relationship more complicated than family ties. Khalid tucked this piece of information away, knowing it could be the thread that unraveled everything. Imran tried to maintain composure, answering questions with the calmness of a grieving husband, yet his story carried holes. He spoke of leaving the house briefly, of returning to find the chaos, but his timeline was vague. He avoided eye contact when pressed on details, his voice faltering when the questions grew specific. Sofiya, on the other hand, presented herself as composed and collected. She played the role of a grieving mother-in-law, her tears falling on cue, but her calmness appeared too rehearsed, too calculated. As the investigation widened, phone records revealed late-night calls exchanged between Imran and Sofiya. Bank transfers, small but frequent, showed money moving between them. Digital footprints, once overlooked, became glaring signs of connection. Detective Khalid built the picture slowly, piece by piece, until the portrait became clear. The affair was no longer speculation. It was a motive strong enough to push two people into betrayal and murder. In the quiet of his office, Khalid reviewed the evidence late into the night. He had seen crimes of greed and rage, but this was different. This was a crime born out of lust and manipulation, a bond between two people that had crossed every boundary of morality. The staged burglary had failed to convince him. The cracks in their alibi were widening, and the truth was beginning to slip through. For Imran, the weight of his actions began to show. His eyes carried sleepless shadows, his movements became restless, and his words betrayed unease. Sofiya noticed his unraveling, but instead of fear she grew colder, more determined to hold control. She reminded him constantly that they were bound together, that if one of them fell, so would the other. But beneath her calm, even she could sense the walls closing in. The crime they believed they had disguised was unraveling faster than either of them imagined, and Detective Khalid was determined to expose it fully. The investigation reached its breaking point when Detective Arman Khalid brought both Imran and Sofiya to the station for questioning. They were seated separately, yet their stories mirrored each other in ways that seemed rehearsed. Both insisted Nadia's death was the result of a burglary that had turned violent. Both claimed they had no idea who might have wanted to harm her. On the surface, their answers aligned, but Khalid had already gathered enough evidence to know the cracks were there. His task was simply to push until they widened. The pressure began to weigh on Imran. For days without proper sleep had drained him, and the haunting image of Nadia's lifeless body gnawed at his mind. He could still feel the weight of his actions every time he closed his eyes. Though Sofiya had coached him to remain calm, guilt was not something he could silence. His voice trembled when Khalid asked about the night of the murder, and his answers grew inconsistent. At times he claimed he had stepped out briefly, at other times he insisted he had been home all evening. The contradictions were small but noticeable, enough for the detective to press hard. Sofiya, in contrast, displayed an unnerving calmness. She sat upright, her hands folded neatly, tears slipping down her cheeks when the detectives mentioned her daughter. She portrayed herself as a grieving mother, who had suffered an unimaginable loss. Yet her composure was too controlled, her emotions too carefully placed.
Khalid had seen such performances before. He knew when grief was genuine, and when it was a mask. Beneath her silence, he sensed calculation, as though she believed she could still steer the situation in her favor. The turning point came when Khalid presented Imran with the collected evidence. He laid out the inconsistencies in the staged burglary, the phone records showing late-night communication with Sofiya, and the testimony from the neighbor who had seen him entering her room. Piece by piece, the carefully crafted illusion collapsed. Imran's face drained of color as the detective's words painted the reality of what he had done. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands trembling, his lips struggling to form a defense. The weight of silence stretched until finally he broke. Imran's confession spilled out in fragments, each word heavier than the last. He admitted the affair, the pressure from Sofiya, and the manipulation that had pushed him toward betrayal. He described how he had tried to resist, how guilt tore at him, but how he ultimately gave in on that fateful night. Tears streamed down his face as he recounted the moment of violence, his voice cracking under the memory. He begged for forgiveness, yet nothing could erase the reality of his crime. When Sofiya was confronted with Imran's confession, her composure faltered for the first time. Her eyes narrowed, her calm mask slipping as she realized the man she had controlled had now turned against her. She denied everything at first, calling him a liar, claiming he was inventing stories to protect himself. But the evidence was stacked too high, and her denials rang hollow. The detectives pressed further, and though she refused to confess fully, her silence became its own admission. The courtroom trial that followed became a spectacle that shocked the community. People who had once admired Imran as a man of faith and responsibility now listened in horror as the affair and murder were laid bare. The betrayal was unimaginable, a husband conspiring with his mother-in-law to kill the woman who trusted them both. Sofiya's coldness on the stand chilled everyone present. She showed no visible remorse, only defiance, as though she believed she had done nothing wrong. Imran, on the other hand, broke down repeatedly, consumed by guilt and shame. The verdict was severe. Both Imran and Sofiya were sentenced to life in prison, their fates sealed by the crime that bound them together. Nadia's family wept in the courtroom, mourning not only her death, but the betrayal that had made it possible. The story spread across Malaysia, a reminder of how quickly trust could turn into tragedy when desire and manipulation took root. Behind prison walls, Imran carried the unbearable weight of guilt, his nights haunted by the face of the woman he once promised to protect. Sofiya remained unyielding, her silence as cold as the crime itself. What began as a secret affair ended as a lifetime of punishment, a story etched into the collective memory of a community that would never forget the darkness hidden inside one seemingly perfect family.